It was a hot summer in Louisiana in 1855, and it was hard to breathe at Willow Grove Plantation. The air was very humid, and there were clouds of mosquitoes flying over the dark swamps that surrounded the big property. Along the long drive to the big white mansion, magnolia trees stood guard. Their sweet smell hid the sour feeling of pain that hung over the estate. Adelaide Beaumont sat in her parlor, fanning herself with a fan against her pale skin as she looked through lace curtains at the fields outside. At 43, she was still a striking figure. Her dark hair had only a few gray strands, and her posture was stiff from the discipline of a woman born to lead. She had been a widow for 5 years and had turned her husband's failing plantation into one of the most profitable in all of Louisiana. "More tea, missus?" asked Esther the maid, as she walked up with a silver tray and looked down. "Yes," Adelaide said, her voice having the refined Charleston accent of her childhood. "Tell Thomas I want to talk to him." Esther hesitated, and her hands shook a little as she poured the tea.
Mrs. Young Master Thomas rode out to the North Fields this morning to check on the new workers."
Adelaide's lips curled into a thin smile. Of course he did. The handsome son was always busy. Her fingers ran over a leather ledger on the side table, which had columns of numbers showing her human inventory, ages, values, breeding pairs, and offspring. Thomas, her oldest child, was 24 years old and looked just like his father, but there was one big difference that Adelaide had skillfully hidden from the people of Baton Rouge. His skin was fair, but it had a sun-kissed look that hinted at his mixed heritage, which was a secret known only to those who lived on the plantation. The sound of hoofbeats caught Adelaide's attention. She saw Thomas get off through the window. He moved with natural authority because he was so tall. As he walked by, the field hands looked down, and you could see how scared they were from far away. Adelaide locked the ledger in her desk drawer and closed it. Thomas came in a few minutes later, took off his hat, and wiped the sweat off his forehead. "Mother," he said with a respectful nod. Adelaide told him, "The Wilkses are coming over for dinner tomorrow. Judge Wilkes has news from New Orleans that could be important to us." Thomas got tense. "What kind of news?" "Rumors of Northern agitators and abolitionists spreading dangerous ideas." She calmly sipped her tea. "And his daughter Sarah will be there too. She's old enough to get married now." A shadow fell across Thomas's face. "You know I can't." "Can't what?" Adelaide cut him off quickly. "Do your duty to this family and keep our position. Your brother James knows what he needs to do." Thomas said with anger, "James likes his job. I don't have the same desires as him." Adelaide carefully put her teacup down. "Your desires don't matter. The Beaumont legacy must go on, and our methods must stay secret. You should know better than to question this." A woman's scream broke the quiet of the afternoon outside, but it quickly faded. Thomas finally said, "The new girl from Georgia. She tried to run last night." Adelaide nodded, not surprised. "And James took care of it." The words were full of unspoken fear. Good order must be kept. Adelaide stood up and smoothed her skirts. "Thomas, we've built something amazing here that will last for generations if we take care of it." As night fell on Willow Grove, lanterns lit up the paths between the slave quarters. Adelaide watched from her balcony as her second son, James, walked toward the cabins. At 22, he moved with a plan, ledger in hand, and was his mother's son in more ways than one. Adelaide's careful plan would move forward tomorrow when the Wilkses and their daughter, who was ready to get married, came to visit. The plantation's terrible secret stayed safe within its borders, hidden under layers of Southern propriety and the unquestioned power of the Beaumont name. As Adelaide turned away from the balcony, she could hear people crying in the cabins far away. The sound floated through the night air like a ghost's whisper. The blood-red sunrise stained the cotton fields red in the morning. Thomas Beaumont watched it from his bedroom window. He couldn't sleep because it was so hot outside. The plantation was already waking up. Field hands were shuffling toward another long day of work, and house servants were moving quietly through the mansion, getting ready for the day ahead. Thomas got dressed in a methodical way, with precise movements. His reflection showed a man stuck between two worlds, with features that could pass in white society, but a heritage that would destroy him if it were found out. His mother raised him and James with calculated cruelty, hiding it behind privilege. She taught them far more than was allowed for people of mixed blood, while also teaching them the brutal hierarchy that put them in a dangerous position of power. Someone knocked on the door and broke his train of thought. "Come in," he said as he put on his cufflinks. James strolled in, already dressed for the day, with a smug smile on his face. They were brothers, but they were very different. Thomas felt guilty, but James was excited about their mother's vision in a way that made him uncomfortable. James said, "You missed a very fun night," as he casually sat down. "Mother says the new girl has spirit, which is good for the bloodline." Thomas turned away in disgust. "Is that all you care about? Bloodlines and money?" James laughed, but it wasn't a warm laugh. "What else matters? Mother has built an empire by understanding what others won't. That careful breeding yields better results." He pointed out the window. "Look at our workers next to the neighbors. They're stronger, healthier, and more resilient. Mother is just using livestock principles on a different kind of property." "They are people, James." James corrected himself, saying, "They are assets." He got up and poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher on Thomas's dresser. "And we, dear brother, are the overseers of this carefully constructed lineage." He took a long drink. "Sometimes I wonder about us. What was Mother really thinking?" Thomas knew the story, or the version that Adelaide had carefully made up. People said that their father, the well-respected Charles Beaumont, was their mother. But the truth, which the oldest servants whispered, was very different. Adelaide had picked their father out of the plantation slaves herself. A strong and smart man she later sold to keep her secrets safe. Thomas changed the subject by saying, "The Wilkses came today. Mother wants you to win over the daughter." James smiled as he straightened his waistcoat. "Sarah Wilkes. I've seen her at church. She's a shy little thing, but she's from a good family. Mother would like the match. What if she knew what happens in the quarters after dark? Would she approve?" James's face got hard. "What's going on in the quarters is business, brother. Marrying Sarah Wilkes would be a different kind of business. Don't mix the two up." They found their mother in the dining room downstairs, going over the plans for dinner with the housekeeper. Adelaide looked up as they came in and quickly sized them up with her sharp eyes. "James, you'll sit next to Sarah tonight," she said. "Thomas, you will entertain the judge. His support could be very helpful in the coming months." "Yes, Mother," they said at the same time, a habit they had as children that they had not outgrown. Thomas saw a group of new workers being led from the barns to the east fields through the window. One of them was a young woman with bruises on her face that weren't there yesterday. She tripped a little, and the overseer raised his whip. Thomas walked toward the door without even thinking. "Leave it," Adelaide said in a voice that sounded like steel. "Mr. Gentry is good at what he does." "Mr. Gentry's too much," Thomas said. Adelaide's eyes narrowed in a scary way. "Mr. Gentry knows what value is. Things that are broken are worth less, but discipline must be kept. That girl tried to run away twice. Examples must be made." James put a hand on Thomas's shoulder to stop him. "Mom is right. The system only works when rules are followed." Outside, the whip cracked, and the morning air was filled with a scream of pain that seemed to cut Thomas's very soul. The other workers kept their heads down and their faces blank, a skill that had been passed down through generations of pain. Thomas suddenly pulled away from his brother's grip and said, "I have business in town." Adelaide looked at him with a calculating look. "Be back by 4. And Thomas," she said, waiting for him to look her in the eye, "remember who you are and what you owe this family." The white columns of the plantation faded into the background as Thomas rode toward Baton Rouge. His mother's empire weighed on him like a physical force, a legacy built on pain, kept alive by fear, and kept safe by secrets that would destroy them all if they were ever revealed. But Adelaide didn't know that Thomas had secrets and connections in town that would scare her if she found out. The Beaumont legacy was built on sand that moved, and Thomas had started to dig at its base. The Wilkes family got there right at 6 o'clock. Their carriage crunched over the shell-lined drive as the sun set, casting long shadows across Willow Grove. Adelaide stood at the front door, looking like a southern lady in her emerald silk dress, with Thomas and James on either side of her in their best clothes. First, Judge Ephraim Wilkes came down. He was a large man whose judicial robes had made him rich and powerful in Louisiana. Next came his wife, Beatrice, who had a pinched look on her face that made it seem like she was always unhappy. Sarah Wilkes finally showed up. She was a tall, skinny 20-year-old with downcast eyes and gloved hands that nervously fiddled with her reticule. Judge Wilkes kissed Adelaide's hand with wet lips and said, "Adelaide, you look as beautiful as ever. Willow Grove seems to do well with your help. Charles would be proud." "You're too nice, Ephraim," Adelaide said, her smile well-practiced and perfect. "Come in, please. Dinner is ready." There were silver and crystal all over the dining room, and candelabras made the damask tablecloth look golden. As they served course after course, the servants moved quietly around the table, their faces blank. Thomas saw that Sarah Wilkes flinched whenever a slave got too close, and it was clear that she was uncomfortable even though she tried to hide it. "Congratulations are in order," Adelaide said to Judge Wilkes as the soup was served. "Your decision on the Henderson property dispute was very good for us." The judge laughed, and his jowls shook. "Just following the law, my dear. But I do want to thank you for helping me get re-elected." "Speaking of law," Thomas said, ignoring his mother's angry look, "what news from the legislature about the proposed limits on some plantation practices?" There was an awkward silence. Before he answered, Judge Wilkes wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Those troublemakers from the north are still getting involved. But don't worry, our way of life is safe. But I must warn you, Adelaide, I've heard rumors that some plantations are using strange methods to breed." His small eyes flickered between James and Adelaide. The kinds of things that even our most loyal fans would have a hard time defending. Adelaide's laugh sounded like glass breaking. "Ephraim, gossip and slander. But I'm curious, what do these rumors mean?" Thomas got tense as he watched his mother sail through these dangerous waters like a pro. James talked pleasantly with Sarah Wilkes, who seemed to be getting used to his practiced charm. "Selective breeding, my dear," Judge Wilkes said in a lower voice, but the servants could probably still hear him. "Using mixed-blood overseers to improve the stock, as it were. These are terrible things that blur lines that should be kept clear." "How disgusting," Adelaide said smoothly. "Who would tell such cruel stories?" "Yes," the judge said, reaching for his wine. "I've heard that Willow Grove has the healthiest field hands in 3 parishes. Your methods must be worth copying." "Just good food and strict discipline," Adelaide told him. "Nothing more strange than that." When the main course came, a roast duck with orange glaze, Thomas saw that his mother and the judge were talking to each other without saying a word. Under the surface of polite conversation, a negotiation was going on that could decide the future of Willow Grove. "Sarah," Adelaide said to the girl, "I hear you're quite good at the piano. Would you mind playing for us after dinner? James really likes music." Sarah looked at James through her lowered lashes and blushed. "Thank you, Mrs. Beaumont. It would be an honor." The talk turned to safer subjects, like the upcoming harvest ball, the new Episcopal minister, and the scandalous marriage of a Natchez heiress to her writing instructor. Thomas mostly stayed quiet the whole time, watching the show unfold around him. His mother making deals, James easily wooing the Wilkes girl, the judge hinting at threats while accepting Adelaide's hospitality, and the silent servants who knew all the Beaumont secrets, bringing dishes to and from the kitchen where Esther was in charge. Esther, whose son was sold away at 12 because he looked too much like Thomas. After dinner, they went to the parlor, where Sarah did play the piano. Her long fingers moved skillfully over the keys. James turned the pages for her, standing closer than was polite. By the fireplace, Judge Wilkes and Adelaide talked quietly, while Mrs. Wilkes slept soundly on a couch. Thomas went outside to the porch and breathed in the night air like a drowning man. It was quiet in the quarters tonight. Adelaide had told Thomas not to discipline anyone while the Wilkeses were there, but Thomas knew what would happen when the guests left. He heard a soft footstep that told him someone else was there. Sarah Wilkes joined him at the railing and said, "You look worried, Mr. Beaumont." Her face showed a level of intelligence that her shy behavior had hidden. "Just looking for some fresh air, Miss Wilkes." "Me too," She looked toward the slave quarters, which were hard to see in the dark. Your brother says good things about the management at Willow Grove. He says your mother has come up with ways of doing things that other plantations wish they could do. Thomas looked at her closely. My brother is very proud of the new things our family has done. And you don't? The direct question caught him off guard. I think we should look at the moral cost of all new ideas, not just the money they make. Sarah nodded her head slowly. Similar questions are what make northern interference happen, my father says. That kind of thinking can ruin a good business. And what do you say, Miss Wilkes? Her eyes stayed on his. Mr. Beaumont, I say that God sees what happens in the dark, even in Louisiana. The doors to the parlor opened, letting in light onto the veranda before Thomas could answer.
Sarah, James yelled. Mom wants to see you. She wants to show you the family pictures.
Sarah went back inside after giving Thomas one last meaningful look. Thomas stayed on the porch, thinking about what his brother had said. The system only works when rules are followed. Thomas had come to think that some rules should be broken, even if it meant ruining everything Adelaide Beaumont had worked so hard to build. The Wilkses left just before midnight. Their carriage disappeared down the moonlit drive, and crickets chirped in the fields around them. Adelaide stood on the front steps until they were gone, her face showing how happy she was. Good job, James, she said as they went back inside. Sarah seemed to really like you. The judge hinted that he would approve of a formal courtship. James was pleased with the praise. She's good enough. She comes from a good family, is well-bred, and might be a little boring, but she's easy to mold. Thomas fought back a wave of disgust at how his brother talked about the girl in a clinical way. She seemed to be more aware than she really is. Adelaide's eyes got smaller. Tell me more. She asked us about our methods and seemed especially interested in how we run the quarters. Adelaide's face showed a flash of worry before she got her composure back. Just girlish curiosity, nothing more. Judge Wilkes knows better than to let his daughter run a plantation. She looked at James. Still, be careful what you say when you're dating. Feelings can get in the way in these situations. Speaking of the quarters, James said as he looked at his pocket watch, Mr. Gentry will be waiting for instructions about the new arrivals. Adelaide nodded. Go. We'll talk more about the Wilkses in the morning. Adelaide gave Thomas a piercing look after James left. I didn't have much to say because you were so quiet tonight. Not at all, she said. That question about legislative restrictions almost ruined our whole plan. The judge doesn't like being reminded of political realities at dinner. Thomas looked her in the eye. Maybe he needs to be reminded more often. His position won't protect him or us if certain things come to light. Adelaide moved closer, and her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Nothing will come to light, because you will make sure it doesn't. Remember your place, Thomas. You exist at my pleasure, as you always remind me. Her hand shot out and hit him across the cheek with surprising force. Don't test me. I've built this empire from nothing, and I won't let your misplaced conscience tear it down. Do you think the northern states would welcome you if they knew the truth? You're neither fish nor fowl, Thomas. Willow Grove is the only place you'll ever belong. She turned away, and her calmness came back right away. Before you go to bed, check on Mr. Gentry. Make sure James doesn't get too excited about the new arrivals. We paid a lot of money for them. Thomas touched his sore cheek when he was alone in the big entrance hall. You exist at my pleasure, his mother had said to him. They weren't just a threat. They were a reminder of how powerful she was. Everyone at Willow Grove was there because Adelaide Beaumont wanted them to be there. Their lives were shaped by her ambition, and when they stopped being useful to her, she crushed them under her heel. As Thomas walked to Mr. Gentry's cabin, the night air was thick with humidity. The overseer's house was separate from both the main house and the slave quarters. This showed how he was in between the two on the plantation. As Thomas got closer, he could hear voices coming through the open windows, including his brother's unique laugh. Before going in, he knocked once. The inside of the cabin was simple but comfortable, which was very different from the dirty, cramped quarters where the slaves lived. Mr. Gentry, a thin man with cold eyes and a sneer that never went away, sat at his desk and looked over a ledger. James sat in a chair nearby. with a glass of whiskey in his hand. A young woman stood against the wall, her eyes down, and she was shaking. "Thomas," James said without any warmth. "Come to supervise?" Mr. Gentry stood up, polite, but also a little rude. "Master Thomas, we were just talking about the new Georgia group and how all of them are going to be great additions." Thomas didn't listen to him. He was more interested in the woman. She looked like she was no older than 17, and her dark skin was covered in old scars and new bruises. "You should be in the quarters," he said softly. James said, "She's needed here. Mr. Gentry is looking at her potential." "I've seen enough potential tonight," Thomas said in a cold voice. "Mom sent me to make sure you don't break anything valuable." James's eyes flashed dangerously, but he knew better than to go against what their mother had told them, even if it was through Thomas. He stood up, after slowly drinking his whiskey. "Very well. We'll continue the assessments tomorrow." He looked at the girl. "Go back to the women's quarters and tell Hattie to expect me tomorrow after dark." James went straight to Thomas after the girl ran away into the dark. "Don't get involved in things you don't understand. I get it. Mother has made her fortune by treating people like breeding stock, and you are her eager student." Mr. Gentry moved around in his seat, feeling the brothers' tension. James hissed, "Our mother has made something amazing here. The bloodlines and careful selection are all scientific and even progressive. While other planters watch their stock get weaker with each generation, ours gets stronger." "And where do we fit into this scientific program?" Thomas asked. "What were we made for, James?" The question hung in the air between them. Mr. Gentry suddenly became very interested in his ledger. James finally said, "We were raised to lead, to carry on what Mother started." "We were experiments," Thomas said, "and now we are in charge of her and making sure her vision comes true. Don't think you're anything more than that." James's face twisted in anger. "I am a Beaumont. One day this plantation will be mine." "Is that a Beaumont?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "Ask Mother about our father sometime. Ask her what field he worked in before she chose him." Mr. Gentry looked up quickly at this, and his face showed that the staff had heard this rumor. James's hand went to the knife on his belt. "One more word, brother, and blood won't help you." "Guys," Mr. Gentry said smoothly, "it's late, and there's a lot of work to do tomorrow. I hope the judge's visit went well." The planned change of subject eased the dangerous tension. James let go of the knife and took a step back. He kept his eyes on Thomas and said, "The visit went exactly as Mother planned. It always does." The grand mansion, the fertile fields, and the carefully maintained bloodlines of Willow Grove all seemed to weigh down on Thomas with every step he took back to the main house. All of it was built on suffering and kept going through fear. Thomas Beaumont was stuck in the middle, not a master or a slave, not white or black, but a living example of Adelaide's hypocrisy and cruelty. But when the moon went behind some clouds and the plantation became dark, Thomas felt a strong sense of clarity come over him. His mother thought she owned him, just like she thought she owned everyone else at Willow Grove. But to be the owner, you had to be in charge, and for months, Thomas had been secretly giving up that power. Adelaide Beaumont would soon find out how dangerous her oldest son had become. The work bell rang at dawn in Willow Grove, waking the slaves up for another day of hard work. Thomas had been awake for hours and couldn't sleep after his fight with James. He sat at his desk with a quill over a piece of fine paper, carefully writing words that could ruin everything. The letter was sent to Mr. Frederick Northcott, who worked for the Boston Liberator, a well-known newspaper that was against slavery. It was Thomas's 5th letter to the man, and each one was more detailed than the last. It talked about the terrible things that happened at Willow Grove Plantation, especially Adelaide Beaumont's breeding program, and how she used her own mixed-race sons as overseers. Thomas was aware of the danger he was putting himself in. If he were found out, he would face punishment worse than death. His mother would be very angry, and she would plan her revenge to cause the most pain. But he couldn't stay quiet any longer, not after years of seeing and being a part of the system she had set up. Someone knocked on his door, which scared him. Thomas quickly put the letter under a book as Esther came in with a tray of food. "Good morning, Master Thomas," she said. looking at the bed that hadn't been made and the messy room. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," he said, as she set up the tray on a small table by the window. Esther had worked for the Beaumonts for a long time. Even before Thomas was born, she was one of the oldest servants in the house. She knew all of Willow Grove's secrets, even who Adelaide's son's real parents were. Esther told him, "Your mother wants you to come to the study after breakfast. She's going to see Mr. Gentry and the doctor." Thomas got stiff. When Dr. Whitaker came to visit, it was usually to check on new breeding stock or to see how the female slaves were doing with their pregnancies. "Thanks, Esther," he said, waving her off with a nod. Thomas went back to his letter after she left and added a last paragraph. "Dr. Samuel Whitaker, the plantation's doctor, is involved in these terrible things because he uses his medical knowledge to make breeding more successful while ignoring the suffering he causes. Judge Ephraim Wilkes provides legal protection, making sure that any complaints are quickly silenced. This group of powerful men has let Mrs. Beaumont do whatever she wants for more than 10 years. Thomas signed the letter with the name "A Friend of Liberty," which was not the Beaumont family seal. Instead, he used plain wax to seal it. He would need to find a way to send it from town, where no one could see it, and tell his mother. Thomas quickly ate breakfast and then went to Adelaide's study. The heavy oak door was closed, but he could hear his mother's clear speech, Dr. Whitaker's clinical tone, and Mr. Seven Gentry's rougher speech. "Exceptional vitality in the Georgia group," the doctor said as Thomas walked in. "Especially the two sisters, who are at the perfect age to breed and have great physical traits." Adelaide saw Thomas right away and told him to close the door. "Thomas, good. We were just talking about the new purchases." Dr. Whitaker nodded to say hello. He was thin, wore glasses, and had very clean hands. He had delivered many babies on the plantation, many of them because of Adelaide's breeding program. "As I was saying," the doctor went on, "the older sister shows signs of having been pregnant before and successfully carrying the baby to term. The younger sister, on the other hand, looks untouched and could get a lot of money if sold, but her breeding potential is just as valuable to keep." Adelaide said, "We're not selling." "Mr. Gentry, set up a pairing for both of them within the month. Use the Virginia for the older one. His line has always worked." "And for the younger one?" She looked over at James, who had just come in through a side door. "What do you think?" James stood up straight, clearly happy to be asked. The worker from Memphis has traits that would be useful in the next generation. Adelaide nodded in agreement. "Then do it." She turned to Thomas. "You've been to town a few times this week, so I assume you have business to tell me about." Thomas made himself look her in the eye without blinking. "Cotton prices are stable. Mr. Davidson at the bank said we could raise our line of credit based on expected yields." "Great." Adelaide waved goodbye to Dr. Whitaker and Mr. Gentry and kept her sons behind. When they were alone, her attitude changed a little. She became less of a businesswoman and more of a calculating mother. "The Wilkses have invited you to their summer garden party next week. James, you will go with Sarah. Thomas, Judge Wilkes specifically asked for you to come. He was impressed by how much you knew about the law." Thomas hid his shock. During dinner, the judge hardly even talked to him. He said, "That day I'll be at the Henderson plantation, the delivery of the equipment." "Change the date," Adelaide told him. "The judge's favor is worth more than being on time with Henderson." She looked at Thomas closely. "He said you seemed interested in the legal side of running a plantation. What did you talk about on the porch?" Thomas kept his face blank. "Nothing important. Miss Wilkes came by for a short time. We talked about music." Adelaide's eyes narrowed a little, but she didn't ask any more questions. "The garden party is a chance for us to strengthen our ties with the Wilkses. James, if Sarah agrees, you can start courting her formally." James nodded, and his face showed that he was happy. "And what about the judge's warning about hearsay?" "A shot across our bow," Adelaide said in a calm voice. "He knows something, but he doesn't have proof." The invitation is his way of finding out more, while still being polite. She looked at Thomas. "Which means you need to be there. Charm him. Put his mind at ease." "And what if I can't?" Adelaide's smile didn't reach her eyes. Then we might need to rethink our relationship with the courts. There are other judges in Louisiana, many of whom have daughters who are old enough to marry. The threat was clear. Judge Wilkes was helpful but could be replaced, just like anyone else who threatened Adelaide's carefully built world. Now, she said, I need to finish my inventory. James, go with Dr. Whitaker to check on the pregnant women. Thomas, you can go to town as planned, but be back for dinner. We have a lot to talk about with the Wilkes alliance. When they left the study, Thomas could feel the letter in his pocket like a hot coal. Every step toward town would change their lives forever. There would be no going back once it was posted. James caught his arm in the hallway and spoke softly. Whatever you're planning, brother, think again. Mother always finds out. Thomas pulled back. I don't understand what you mean. James said, You forget that I know you. The trips to town, the talks with that lawyer, and your new interest in northern newspapers. You're playing a dangerous game. For a moment, Thomas thought about telling his brother everything, looking for any sign of the boy James had been before Adelaide changed him and the plantation ruined his soul. Instead, he just said, We're all playing her game, James. I'm just making different moves. James said, Her game is the only one that matters here. Step outside of it, and you'll have nowhere to stand. An hour later, Thomas got on his horse with the letter safely tucked away in his jacket. The road to Baton Rouge looked like a way out, but he knew he would be back in Willow Grove before sundown. He had one more day to keep up the act while planning its end. The white columns of the mansion shone in the morning light behind him. They were a front for generations of planned cruelty. Thomas pushed his horse forward, leaving everything behind, at least for a few hours. He didn't see Esther watching from an upstairs window. She looked worried as she held a piece of paper she had found under Thomas's desk. It was an unfinished draft of his letter to Boston, but it was still damning. The Wilkes garden party was a show of Southern wealth. Ladies in bright silk dresses, twirling parasols, men in summer linens talking about politics and cotton prices, and servants moving around with trays of mint juleps and delicate pastries. The Wilkes estate wasn't as big as Willow Grove, but it had perfectly landscaped gardens that were the perfect place for Baton Rouge society to see and be seen. Adelaide had to make an impression, so she came in the best carriage and wore a French dress that showed off her still youthful figure. James, looking great in a cream linen suit, had gone straight to Sarah Wilkes, leaving Thomas to do his duty of entertaining Judge Wilkes. After some small talk, the judge said, Walk with me, young man. I think these events are boring, but they are important for Beatrice's social standing. As they walked away from the main group toward a small ornamental lake at the edge of the property, Thomas fell in step with the older man. The judge didn't say anything until they were out of earshot of the other guests. He started by saying, Your mother is a remarkable woman, and then he stopped to light a cigar. She lost her husband when she was still young, but she's tripled the value of Willow Grove. That's very impressive. She's committed to making the plantation a success, Thomas said carefully. Yes, Judge Wilkes said with a thoughtful puff. I wonder about her methods. People often talk about how good the workers at Willow Grove are in some circles. Thomas got tense. Workers who eat well and get medical care are healthier. Of course, the judge said as he waved his cigar. But there are whispers, Mr. Beaumont. Disturbing whispers about selective breeding practices, about overseers with unusual heritage. His small eyes were fixed on Thomas's face, studying his features more closely than ever. Overseers who look a lot like the plantation's mistress. Even though it was summer, Thomas felt cold. Judge Wilkes, gossip is not usually true. Not often, but sometimes. He let the thought hang there. Your mother's actions, while maybe good for business, go too far for even our society to accept. Lines must stay clear, Mr. Beaumont. Blood must stay pure. Is that a threat, Judge Wilkes? He laughed, but it sounded empty. Dear boy, this is just friendly advice. Your mother has been very helpful to my campaigns, and I don't want to see Willow Grove's reputation hurt. He tapped the ash off his cigar. Particularly when my Sarah seems so taken with your brother. There was no doubt about what the judge was saying. He knew or strongly suspected the truth about the Beaumont brothers and Adelaide's breeding program, but instead of exposing them, he was still protecting them, and his daughter was the price. Thomas couldn't help but sound bitter when he asked, "And what does Sarah think of this?" The judge's face got harder. "Sarah will do what you tell her to do, just like you and your brother did." He put a heavy hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Mr. Beaumont, we all have our parts to play. Mine is to uphold the law, but only when it's necessary. Yours is to make sure that Willow Grove's business stays profitable but quiet." Thomas took the hand off with great care. "And what if I don't like my job?" "Then I think you should think about it again," Wilkes said coldly. "Your mother knows how important our deal is. I would hate for her to find out that her oldest son doesn't." They went back to the party without saying a word. The judge quickly joined a group of politicians, while Thomas hid by the refreshment table. He saw James and Sarah walking arm in arm across the lawn, with her head tilted toward him as if she were listening to what he was saying. "They're a nice couple, aren't they?" Thomas turned to see Mrs. Wilkes next to him, her thin lips curled up in what looked like a smile. "Yes," he said politely. Mrs. Wilkes kept an eye on the two and said, "Sarah has always been a good daughter. She has her own interests that worry me." Thomas looked at the woman with new interest. "What kinds of interests?" Mrs. Wilkes drank her lemonade. "Books, Mr. Beaumont. Too many books, some with bad ideas. A friend in Charleston sends them to her. I've tried to stop her, but Ephraim lets her." She lowered her voice. "Between you and me, I'm afraid Sarah is an abolitionist. What a scandal it would be if word got out." Thomas's heart raced. "Maybe she's just curious about things," Mrs. Wilkes said with certainty. "Young ladies who are intellectually curious are unhappy with their proper place. I told Ephraim that marrying your brother would be good for her. She would have a house to run and kids to raise. She wouldn't have time for radical literature then." Adelaide came up to Thomas and smiled, but her smile was weak. "Beatrice, you look lovely." She said hello to Mrs. Wilkes. "I have to borrow Thomas for a minute. It's plantation business." Adelaide's smile went away as soon as they were alone. "Did the judge talk to you in private? What did he say?" Thomas thought about lying, but he knew his mother would find out the truth sooner or later. "He knows about me and James and your breeding program. He says he'll keep protecting James if he marries Sarah." Adelaide took this in, without showing any signs of emotion. "As expected, the alliance is good for both families." "He's blackmailing us, Mom. He's making a deal," she said. "That's just how things are, Thomas. Everyone uses what they know to get ahead." Thomas thought about the letter he had sent 3 days ago and was now on its way to Mr. Northcott in the north. "And what if someone used what they know to get ahead of you?" Adelaide's eyes got smaller. "No one would dare. I've made sure that anyone who knows about our business has a good reason to stay quiet." She smoothed out her skirts. "Now, do something useful. Talk to Sarah and see if she has any suspicions. James says she asks a lot of questions about how to run a plantation." Thomas looked around the garden for Sarah while Adelaide glided away to charm a group of lawmakers. He saw her by herself next to a rose trellis, and James had been stopped by other guests. "Miss Wilkes," he said, walking up to her in a casual way. Sarah turned around, and her face lit up. "I see, Mr. Beaumont, that you were saved from my father's long-winded speeches. For now. And you from my brother's attention." She smiled, but her eyes didn't show it. "Your brother is very determined. My father seems just as determined that I help him." Thomas felt like he had a chance. "And what are your decisions, Miss Wilkes?" Sarah looked around before answering to make sure no one could hear her. "My decisions don't matter to either of our families, Mr. Beaumont. I'm just a thing to be traded. But I guess that puts me in a better position than a lot of people at Willow Grove." Thomas's suspicions were confirmed by how direct her comment was. "Do you know how your mother works?" "Yes," Sarah said, looking him straight in the eye. "I've put together enough about you and your brother." "How?" "I listen, Mr. Beaumont. Servants talk when they think no one is listening, and I read things my parents would burn if they found them." Thomas spoke even more quietly. "Materials that are against slavery?" Sarah got tense. Sir, be careful with those kinds of accusations. It's not an accusation, Thomas told her. Instead, an acknowledgement of shared worries. She looked at him closely. My father thinks your brother would make a good husband, one who would stop me from reading dangerous things and give me healthy grandchildren. He doesn't know that I've already taken steps to make sure I never become part of Willow Grove's legacy. What kind of steps? Sarah's face became serious. I have a friend in Boston who works as a conductor on a certain railroad. She looked closely at Thomas's face. I've made plans to go north. I leave in 2 weeks, when Father goes to New Orleans for the court session. Thomas was shocked by the news. Sarah Wilkes, the judge's daughter and the perfect example of Southern gentility, had called the Underground Railroad. He finally said, "That's very dangerous. Less dangerous than becoming Mrs. James Beaumont," she said with surprising force. "I've seen how your brother looks at the female slaves. I know what goes on in the quarters at night." There was no way Thomas could deny it. My brother has completely accepted the way our mother sees the world, and you haven't. The question hung between them, full of potential. Thomas thought about the letter he had sent to Boston, which was already on its way north, of Esther's knowing looks since he sent it, of the judge's threats that weren't very clear. He said carefully, "I've made my own plans. When the time comes..." Sarah's eyes got a little bigger. "Then, maybe..." "Sarah," Mrs. Wilkes's voice broke through their talk. "Your dad wants you to play for the guests." Sarah quickly put on a serious face. "Of course, Mother." And to Thomas she added quietly, "The summer house. If you want to keep talking after the musical, we can meet there." Thomas saw James watching them with open suspicion as she walked away. His brother had always been smart, especially when it came to threats to his job. Thomas would have to be careful. He had thought the garden party would be safe, but it had suddenly become much more dangerous. Adelaide watched everything from under a silk parasol across the lawn. Her face was unreadable as she kept track of every interaction, every glance, and every possible disruption to her carefully built world. The pieces were moving, and the alignments were changing. Thomas could feel it. The forces that would either destroy Willow Grove or keep its terrible secrets safe for another generation were going to hit each other. The music went on and on as Sarah Wilkes played the pianoforte, her thin fingers moving with practiced accuracy across the keys. Guests gathered in the Wilkes' grand parlor, where servants brought them cool drinks and fans to cool off from the heat of the afternoon. Thomas stood near the back, his mind racing with ideas after Sarah told him what she knew. James stood next to him, apparently watching Sarah perform, but he was really focused on Thomas. He said in a low voice, "You and Miss Wilkes looked like you were having a deep conversation earlier. Is there anything I should know?" "Just polite conversation," Thomas lied smoothly. James's face got hard. "Don't try to fool me, brother. I saw how she looked at you." "Maybe she knows what you're really like," Thomas said. "Your name is well known in the area." James's face showed a flash of anger. "Be careful, Thomas. Mom chose me to date Sarah, not you." "I don't want to date the judge's daughter." "Good." James straightened his waistcoat. "Because I want to make this alliance work. Sarah will make a good wife once she learns to be less stubborn." Thomas remembered how far James had gone down their mother's path, and how completely Adelaide had shaped him in her image when he heard his brother's cruel words. James had been kind, even caring to them when they were boys. He now saw Sarah Wilkes as just another thing to get and control. "She deserves better than Willow Grove," Thomas said softly. James laughed. "Better than becoming mistress of the most profitable plantation in 3 parishes? I don't think so." His eyes narrowed. "Unless you filled her head with your wrong ideas." The music ended before Thomas could say anything, and polite applause filled the room. Sarah got up from the piano and thanked everyone with a small curtsy. Then she walked to a side door that Thomas knew led to the garden. They looked at each other for a second across the room, which was a silent sign that they were going to meet. Thomas said to James, "Excuse me, I need some air." "Thomas." James grabbed his arm, his fingers digging painfully into the muscle. "Do you remember where your loyalties lie?" Thomas got away. "I remember everything, brother." The garden was full of light in the late afternoon, and most of the guests had gone inside to listen to the music. Thomas walked down the gravel path to the little summer house that was far away from the main house and next to a grove of magnolia trees. Sarah was already there, looking out at the woods around her with her back to the door. She turned to face him, and her body language showed that she was tense. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. Thomas stepped into the shade of the summer house and said, "My brother thinks something is going on between us. He's paying close attention." Sarah nodded, not surprised. James doesn't miss anything that could put his job at risk. "My dad says that's what makes him valuable to your mom, his vigilance." "What did you want to talk about, Miss Wilkes?" She thought for a moment. "Is your arrangement the one you talked about earlier, like mine?" Thomas thought about his answer carefully. "I've talked to people who could tell the truth about what happens at Willow Grove. Things will change a lot when my letter gets there." Sarah's eyes got bigger as she guessed, "The Liberator? Have you written to Frederick Northcott?" Thomas looked at her in shock. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because Mr. Northcott wrote me a letter last month," she said quickly. "He said he had a pen pal in Baton Rouge who was giving him information about a plantation's breeding program. I never thought it could be you." Thomas was shocked by the news. Sarah Wilkes didn't just feel sorry for abolitionists. She was writing to them. The risk of their talk went up by a huge amount. "When will your letter get to Boston?" she asked again. "Within the week, as long as the mail stays reliable." Sarah walked back and forth in the small room. "Then we don't have much time. Your mother will know right away who betrayed her once the Liberator publishes those details. I've taken steps to protect myself." "Not enough," Sarah said, cutting him off. "You don't get my dad. He keeps your mother's secrets because it helps him politically and financially. Once they come out, he'll do anything to protect his own reputation." Thomas had thought this might happen, but hearing it confirmed made the danger real. "What do you mean?" Sarah got closer and spoke more quietly, even though they were alone. "Come with me. My contact can easily arrange passage for 2 people when I leave for Boston." The offer was both tempting and scary. To leave everything behind and run north. "I can't," Thomas finally said. "Not yet. There are people at Willow Grove who can't get away. I've promised to help them." Sarah's face got softer. "Esther, the house servant, and the others?" Thomas nodded, once more surprised by how smart she was. "How did you—" "I listen," she said again, touching his arm lightly. "But you can't help them if you're dead, Mr. Beaumont, and that's exactly what will happen when your mother finds out you lied to her." What she said made him feel cold. Adelaide's punishment would be quick and harsh, probably a public execution to show that she was in charge. But if he left now, he would be leaving behind the people who had protected him and who had suffered under his mother's rule while he was relatively privileged. He said, "I have to at least warn them. Give them some time to get ready." "Then be careful," Sarah told her. "Your brother." A shadow crossed the door to the summer house. "Yes, be careful with your brother." James's voice cut through their conversation as he walked up. He might hear people talking about treason. Thomas moved without thinking, to get between James and Sarah. "This isn't what you think." James's hand was on the knife at his belt. "Isn't it? My brother and I were planning to escape to Boston and talk to abolitionists. I would say it's exactly what it looks like." Sarah stepped forward with her chin up defiantly. "I am not your intended, Mr. Beaumont. I have never agreed to this." James didn't pay attention to her. He was only interested in Thomas. "How long, brother? How long have you been tearing down everything Mother worked so hard to build?" "This isn't about Mother," Thomas said carefully. "It's about right and wrong. It's about putting an end to pain that should never have happened." James laughed bitterly when he heard the word suffering. "You've lived in luxury your whole life, thanks to Mother's vision. What do you know about suffering?" "A vision based on human suffering," Thomas said in response. "On treating people like breeding stock, even us, James. Have you ever wondered why she chose our father? What traits she was looking for when she got pregnant with us?" James's face showed a flicker of doubt, or a long-buried question, but it went away quickly, replaced by cold rage. He said, "It doesn't matter why we exist. All that matters is that we do our job. Mother will be heartbroken by your betrayal." "She'll be very angry," Thomas said, "but not surprised. She always knew I didn't have your taste for cruelty." James pulled out his knife. which caught the light of the late afternoon Sunday. Now, I have to decide what to do with this information, and with both of you. Sarah gasped and stepped back. Thomas stayed still and looked at his brother's eyes instead of the knife. They had fought as boys, and sometimes they were very mean to each other. But this was different. This was planned adult violence, the kind that led to graves being dug. Thomas said calmly, "If you hurt either of us, you'll destroy everything you say you care about. Kill me, and my letter will still get to Boston. Kill Sarah, and Judge Wilkes will turn against Willow Grove right away." James said, "I haven't said anything about killing anyone," but he still held the knife steady. "There are other ways to make sure it's quiet. It'd be—" Thomas got tense and was ready to protect himself and Sarah if he had to. James just smiled, but it was a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll give you a choice, brother. You can go back to Willow Grove now, tell Mother what you did, and maybe she'll forgive you. Or you can run, and I'll find you myself. And Miss Wilkes?" James looked at Sarah with disdain. "She'll marry me as planned. Her father will make sure of it once he finds out about her mistakes." "I will never marry you," Sarah said, her voice steady even though she was clearly scared. James said coldly, "You will do what I say. Women always do in the end." Thomas felt like he was at a crossroads, with each path leading to consequences that couldn't be changed. Adelaide would break him, maybe even kill him, if he went back to Willow Grove like James wanted. James would hunt him down without stopping if he ran. Sarah would have to marry his brother either way, which would put her in the system she hated. "James," he said, looking for words that might reach the part of the boy who had once been his brother, "we don't have to be what Mother made us. We can choose to be different." For a second, the briefest flicker, Thomas thought he saw doubt in James's eyes. Then the knife shone. As James lunged forward, Thomas grabbed James's wrist without thinking as the knife came at him. The brothers hit the railing of the summer house, and the wood broke under their weight. The sound of Sarah's scream carried across the garden to the main house. "Run!" Thomas yelled at her while he tried to stop James from using his knife. "Help!" Sarah thought about it for a moment before grabbing her skirts and running toward the house. James growled and hit Thomas in the ribs with his free hand, which hurt a lot. "You've messed everything up," James yelled as he brought the knife down again. Thomas turned away, and the knife cut through the sleeve of his jacket and left a line of fire across his forearm. They broke up and walked around each other in the small space of the summer house. Thomas's arm was bleeding, and the blood stained the wooden floor. James's face was twisted with rage, and all signs of civilization were gone. James said it was always going to end like this, and his breathing was heavy. "Mother knew you were weak. She should have killed you years ago." "Did she do that to the other people?" Thomas asked, trying to keep James talking while he looked for a way in. "The ones who didn't live up to her expectations?" James's face showed a flash of confusion. "What other? Her other experiments? You don't think we were her first try, do you?" Thomas moved back toward the door, pulling James away from his escape route. "At some point, ask her about the kids who went missing, the ones who didn't have the traits she wanted." James growled, "You're lying." But there was doubt in his voice. "Am I? Think, James. How many house servants have gone missing over the years? How many times has Mother sent away kids who looked too much like us?" James hesitated, and the knife shook a little. That was the chance Thomas had been waiting for. He lunged forward, hitting James's chest with his shoulder. This made them both crash through the summer house railing and fall to the ground below. As they rolled down a small hill, the knife flew out of their hands, and they fought in the dirt and grass. James's greater strength gave him the upper hand, and he quickly pinned Thomas down, his hands around Thomas's throat. James growled, "I've always been the better son," and tightened his grip. "Father knew it. Mother knew it." "Which father?" Thomas gasped, trying to catch his breath. "Is it the white man whose name we bear, or the slave whose blood we share?" James's grip slipped for a moment, which gave Thomas the chance to get away. He ran away, gasping for air as James got up. Voices called out from far away, and the guests at the garden party answered Sarah's alarm. "It's over, James," Thomas said, wheezing as he backed up to the trees. "When that letter gets to Boston, everyone will know Willow Grove's secrets. Mother's empire will fall apart." James walked up to him with a murderous look on his face. "Then I'll make sure you don't live to see it," he yelled. And Thomas was ready. He moved to the side at the last second and used James's speed to send him crashing into a tree trunk. James got better quickly and spun around with his fists raised, but Thomas was already running away. Not toward the house where curious guests were gathering, but toward the woods that bordered the Wilkes property. James yelled for horses and men to chase after him. Thomas knew he had only a few minutes before people would start looking for him. The only thing he had going for him was that he knew the land. He learned every stream and trail in the area by growing up in Willow Grove. As he ran, the branches of the trees whipped his face. His hurt arm throbbed and blood soaked his sleeve, but he kept going. He had to get to Willow Grove before James did, so that he could warn Esther and the others and put their backup plan into action. Thomas came out of the woods near a small creek that he knew would eventually flow into the river that ran past the edge of Baton Rouge. Following it would take longer, but it would be better at hiding than the main road. He jumped into the water, hoping it would throw off any dogs James might send after him. Thomas's mind raced with numbers as he moved quickly through the gathering darkness. Sarah's parents would probably keep her inside once the noise stopped. James would get men from the Wilkes estate to hunt him down, but he would also tell Adelaide. Unless he got to Willow Grove first, his mother would quickly suspect which servants had helped him and punish them right away. The trip took almost 2 hours, and Thomas ran and walked to save his energy. He heard horsemen on nearby roads twice and hid until they were gone. His arm had stopped bleeding, but it hurt a lot, and his throat was bruised from James's fingers. The white columns of Willow Grove Mansion could be seen by the time night fell. Thomas came from the west, staying away from the main road. The house was lit up, which was strange for this time of day, which made it seem like Adelaide had really found out about his betrayal. Thomas went straight to the slave quarters without stopping at the mansion. The cabins were dark and quiet, and the people who lived there were probably asleep after another long day of hard work. He snuck between buildings until he got to Hattie's cabin at the end, which was the agreed-upon meeting place in case something went wrong. He scratched the door in the way they had agreed on. After a while, it opened a little, and Hattie's worried face was visible. "Master Thomas," she whispered, quickly leading him inside. "We were afraid of the worst." There was only one candle in the cabin, so the inside was dark. Esther sat at the rough-hewn table with a serious look on her face. There were 3 other people there: Josiah, Adelaide's coachman, who knew every road in the parish; Mary, a young woman who worked in the laundry and had been the subject of James's attention; and Samuel, an old man who had been at Willow Grove longer than anyone else. "James knows," Thomas said right away. "There was something that happened at the Wilkes estate. He'll come for me and anyone he thinks helped me." Esther nodded, not surprised. "An hour ago, we heard that Miss Adelaide had the overseers search the property and Mr. Gentry check each cabin." Thomas swore under his breath. "Then we have at most 10 minutes. Is everything ready?" Josiah said. "As you told me to. The little boat is hidden in the reeds where the creek and river meet. It has food for 3 days." "What happened?" Esther asked, seeing that Thomas's arm was hurt and his throat was bruised. "James tried to kill me," Thomas said simply. "Sarah Wilkes was there. She knows I've been writing to the Liberator. She's planning to escape north on her own." Samuel's eyes got bigger. "Judge Wilkes's daughter? An abolitionist?" Thomas said, "The world is changing, even here in Louisiana," he said, turning to Mary. "Those who said they would run? Waiting by the old oak," she said. "There were 6 in all. The others were too scared." Thomas couldn't hold it against them. If they were caught, they could be tortured or killed, and even if they succeeded, they didn't know what would happen next. For a lot of people, the devil they knew seemed safer than the one they didn't. Thomas said, "We need to move now, when we get to the river." With a loud crack, the door flew open. Mr. Gentry stood in the dark with a gun in one hand and 2 big overseers on either side of him. "Well, well," he said slowly, pointing the gun at Thomas. "Your mother will be happy that the prodigal son has come home." Thomas got tense as he thought about how far away they were, and how likely it was that he could take down 3 armed men before one of them could shoot. "Move aside, Mr. Gentry," he said in a calm voice. "Nobody needs to get hurt." The overseer laughed. "Someone is definitely going to get hurt tonight. Mrs. Beaumont was very clear about that." He looked around the cabin at the people who were there. "Looks like we've also found your helpers. That's 2 birds with 1 stone." One of the overseers moved forward with a rope in hand. Thomas got ready to fight, knowing it was probably pointless, but not wanting to give up without a fight. Then, in the dark, a tall, scary figure appeared behind Mr. Gentry. "That's enough, Mr. Gentry." The overseer turned around in shock, his gun shaking. "Mr. James, I was just—" "Going beyond your authority," James said coldly as he stepped into view. He looked great, even though it was late, and there was no sign of their earlier fight except for a small cut above his eyebrow. "Mother wants Thomas to be brought to the house unharmed." Mr. Gentry hesitated, clearly upset that he couldn't use violence. "And what about these other people?" James looked at the people in the cabin with a clinical detachment. "Lock them up in the old storehouse. Mother will take care of them in the morning." He looked Thomas in the eye. "I have unfinished business with my brother." As the overseers were about to tie up the others, Thomas stepped forward. "James, these people are innocent. You only have a problem with me." James's laugh was not funny. "Innocent? They plotted against Mother and Willow Grove. That's not innocent at all." He pointed to the door. "Now, do we have to do this with dignity, or do I have to drag you?" Thomas looked at Esther and the other people who had put their lives on the line to help him. Their faces showed both fear and determination. They knew how dangerous it was when they agreed to his plan. Thomas finally said, "I'll come. But this isn't the end, James." "On that," his brother said with a grim look on his face. "We are in full agreement." James kept a close eye on the overseers as they led the others toward the storehouse and walked toward the mansion. There were no weapons in sight, but Thomas was sure his brother was armed. "Sarah?" Thomas asked in a low voice. James said, "Under her father's close watch." The judge was very upset to find out about his daughter's letters. "Did you hurt her?" James looked offended. "She's going to be my wife, Thomas. I wouldn't hurt my own things." Thomas's skin crawled when he heard his brother's voice casually owning up to something. "She'll never agree to marry you." James said, "Willingness is overrated. Mother has set up rooms for you in the East Wing. You'll stay there until some things are worked out." "You mean until my letter gets to Boston?" James's face got tense. "Mother has sent riders to stop the mail coach. Your letter will never get to its destination." Thomas smiled a little. "I sent 3 copies. Each one went a different way with a different courier. One will get through." James's face showed uncertainty for the first time. They had made it to the back door of the mansion, where Adelaide stood in the doorway, her shape dark against the bright inside. She said, "Thomas," and her voice showed no emotion. "Welcome home." When Thomas stepped inside, he felt the weight of Willow Grove's secrets, suffering, and bloody history come back to him. But this time, unlike all the other times, he knew it wouldn't keep him forever. The time for reckoning had come.